All right, good morning. I'm David Haynes. I'm the Senior Fellow for Climate Security at the American Security Project. Thanks very much for joining us here at WJCT Studios in Jacksonville. Thanks to those of you joining us online as well. Thanks to our partners for this event, the ADAPT program at WJCT and the Northeastern Florida Regional Planning Council. We're honored to have the opportunity to be here in Northeastern Florida. I'll be joined later by two members of the Jacksonville City Council, Randy Defour and Aaron Bowman, for panel discussion. Thanks very much to them for joining us and for their work on resiliency in Jacksonville. The American Security Project was founded in 2004 by Secretaries Kerry and Hagel as a bipartisan educational resource for the public and for policymakers interested in national security. Specifically, it's been focused on climate security. ASP has done a lot of work within DC, including briefing members of Congress, testifying on the Hill, but we find it's very important to link national security experts with communities who are vulnerable to climate change and host national security infrastructure. We're lucky to have with us today one of the members of our Consensus for American Security, retired Marine Corps Lieutenant General John Castelaw, call sign GLAD. General Castelaw is co-founder and chief executive officer of Farm Space Systems, LLC, a provider of aerial data collection, management, and equipment. During a 36-year career, he led Marines around the world, ashore and afloat, flew over 24 different kinds of aircraft, served on the UN staff during the siege of Sarajevo, planned and executed humanitarian operations in Asia, Africa, and Europe, commanded the American Forces Stability and Security Operations in East Timor, and was chief of staff for the U.S. Central Command during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. His final assignments were in the Pentagon, where he oversaw Marine aviation and the Marine Corps budget. A recognized national security expert, he has testified before a Senate Committee on Food Security and is affiliated with several Washington area think tanks, providing expertise on the impacts of climate, food, and energy security. He frequently travels overseas, having visited Cuba, Israel, Qatar, the Central African Republic, Rwanda, and Australia. He lives on and operates his family farm in Crockett County, Tennessee. General Castelaw, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. You know, it's great to be back in Florida for several reasons. First of all, my sister lives in Tallahassee, and she was a professor at Florida State. Do we have any Florida State alumni out there? All right, one back there. He didn't hold his hand very high. I, as indicated, was Chief of Staff at Central Command, which was at Tampa, of course, MacDill. And while there, 2004, 2005, we dodged a couple of hurricanes. Well, I can't say I dodged it. My wife, Wanda, was at home with the dogs and had to go to the Hard Rock Hotel, which was the alternate location for CENTCOM, if you can believe it. Also, done training deployments to Key West and other locations here in Florida. And I've also been on temporary duty here at NAS Jacksonville. NAS Jacksonville has got a facility where after you've been out of flying for a while, they bring you back in and they try to drown you. And water survival training, and fortunately I survived that. But I'm glad to have the council members join us, WJCT, the DAP program. Also, I've got a great comrade out in the office, out in the audience, John O'Neill, who was the XO of the USS Nassau when I was a squadron commander, and we did a Mediterranean float together. So I feel really comfortable to being back here in Florida, and I'm glad all of you came out to participate in this important event. Before I get into my prepared remarks, so I'd like to say a little something about what's been going on in the past week. I'm from Tennessee, West Tennessee, live on the farm, and about an hour from me to the east, just on the other side of the Tennessee River, we had a very dramatic event with the flooding that occurred here this past week. 22 people lost, 10 still missing. That's one of the standard Tennessee country areas, big hogback ridges with narrow valleys, and when you get a rain like that occurred, then it all comes down through those narrow valleys and what were placid streams. At the same time, we were having a hurricane on the East Coast threaten New England, which is a fairly rare occurrence. And out west, for the first time since it was completed in 1933, Lake Mead had a level 1 water shortage declared. And the wildfires that are burning out west are twice the numbers and impact as last year. Clearly, something is occurring. And we can discuss what the cause is, but things are occurring and we need to address resilience and the cause. And people ask, well, what does climate security have to do with this? Why do we care? Well, you know, when old John and the rest of us came into the military, one of the first things we learned, and it was nailed into us the rest of our career, is that you have to be concerned with, one, what are the enemy capabilities? Two, what is the terrain you're operating in? And three, what is the weather that you're going to deal with? Because weather and the climate has the ability to impact operations, whether you're talking about the capabilities of the individual military member, whether you're talking about the systems that we operate, whether you're talking about the logistical system that supports it. All those are impacted by the weather. I'm a history buff, and one of the events in World War II that was significant in the Pacific was Admiral Bull Halsey led Task Force 38. In 1944, in December, Task Force 38 ran into a typhoon, and it was like a major engagement with the Japanese fleet. 3 destroyers were sunk, almost 1,000 sailors were killed, 80 ships were damaged. It took a while for that fleet to recover. So as we in the military do our job, learn to be professionals, operate, climate and weather is always on our plate. When I went through Pensacola to become an aviator, another place in Florida that I've been, had a tour, one of the things you learn about is meteorology, about how the weather impacts flight operations. I was a helicopter guy, and one of the things that we always were concerned about were little items called Bernoullis. Bernoullis are the little molecules and all that flow under the wings that provide the power to keep you airborne. And so what the basic things you learn that, hey, you know, when it's hot and humid, there's more opportunity for water vapor to be pulled into the atmosphere. And you learn how to deal with that. So as military people, we want to be very familiar with where we're going to operate. In fact, you know, the Marine Corps' hymn is in every climb and place. So we are focused on that. What really, I think, within the last 20 years that's brought this in focus and brought it into our discussion of climate security and security strategy was in 2008, the Center for Naval Analysis with a group of great heroes like Tony Zinni, who was commanding general of CENTCOM and is a legend in the Marine Corps, got together and they studied climate and what was happening in terms of change. And they came out with a study, and the essential element of that study is that climate change is a threat multiplier. By that, the group meant that it made bad things worse, in my Tennessee understanding. And what it allowed to happen is if you had a situation, and I'm going to talk about first situations that are overseas that I'm familiar with. I've spent a lot of time over the last 25 years in West Africa, the Lake Chad Basin. And you've got several countries that are around the lake, Nigeria, Niger, Mali. And all of those countries, Chad, are impacted by what's going on as the Sahara Desert comes south at about a mile a year, as the drought increases across the Sahel, and as the temperature rises. How does that impact stability? Well, what you have there, you had, you know, something like 200,000 fishermen on Lake Chad. And as the lake dried up, those fishermen were pushed off the lake. At the same time, you had herdsmen in the northern part of the basin that were pushed south. And they were, both the fishermen and the herdsmen were pushed into the area occupied in the south by farmers. And so what you had is migration into another area with desperate people trying to feed their families, created instability, and provided the opportunity for organizations like Boko Haram to grow and thrive. And so with all that's going on in the world right now, there's still a significant insurgency being waged in the Lake Chad Basin by Boko Haram that has a potential to destabilize the largest population country in Africa, Nigeria, which is also a large producer of oil. And eventually, it can impact our own diplomatic, economic relations. Another area is the Arctic. As we look, and again, you know, I did a lot of flying around the world, and you know, you see a lot of things. I flew over the Lake Chad. I saw what the lake was when I first saw it in 1990, and I saw what it was the last time I was there in 2019. And as I fly in the northern latitudes, you can also see the impact as the ice sheet melts, as areas are open in the Arctic Ocean that hasn't been before. As you see countries like Russia rebuilding large infrastructure, large bases to support aircraft and ground troops in the northern portions of their country. As you see China expressing interest in the Arctic, even though they're not an Arctic country. As we even start to have disagreements with one of our best neighbors, Canada, about passage through those former ice-filled areas. And so that is producing a situation where you can have conflict arise. And what are we doing? We're starting to put more forces up north. We're starting to put some of our best aircraft at places like Eielson Air Force Base. We're starting to move more Navy ships into that area. And the Marines continue to exercises in places like Norway. And so this is why climate change is of interest to the military. Now that's what's happening overseas. What about here? What about here in the United States? You know, Wanda and I spent 3 or 4 tours at Camp Lejeune. Not long ago, a hurricane hit Camp Lejeune and did over $3 billion worth of damage. And a lot of those were to buildings that were built in, the 1940s and withstood all sorts of weather events since then. You've got places like Tyndall here in Florida, which may have suffered $6 billion worth of damage. And as we indicated, we were in Tampa as we were so concerned about the possibility of a hurricane coming up the West Coast and right up through Tampa Bay. Why does the military, care about that? Well, first of all, if you look right here in Jacksonville, you have Mayport, which is a home to the, third largest concentration of shipping in the Navy. Just down St. John's from that, you have a Marine Corps installation, Blunt Island. And what those two installations do is deploy forces. They train while they're in the Mayport, and then they deploy where our nation needs them. And when you have impacts from hurricanes, from rising sea level, then you impact our capability to deploy those forces, deploy them to where they are needed. So that is how it can impact it. Other impacts, Camp Blandin National Guard Base south of here. Troops train there. Right now we're having, I think, about 25 days of extreme temperatures here in Florida a year. In a few years, the projection is that's going to go up to over 100 where they have those extreme temperatures. And that forces reduction in training and preparations to go and fight our nation's battle. And it's right here in Florida where that is happening. And it's not only our military that's involved, but it's also our national security in terms of the economy. Okay, I'm an old farm boy. I still consider myself a farmer that interrupted his farming career for 36 years to be a Marine. But what I found when I came back and I got back on the farm is that events such as thunderstorms are becoming more extreme. And because of that, I have had to do more work with conservation measures on that farm to keep the soil from washing away. I've noticed that the crop season is getting longer. And so it has to be more attention to selecting the type of seeds that we use. It has to be concerns about drought impact, the lack of moisture on those crops, as well as too much moisture. And so all those things are making the lifeblood, many say, of this country, our agricultural production, in order to be successful is more complicated than it's ever been in the past, or at least within our memory. So that detracts from our economic security and our ability to compete with other nations. But what about spending and being able to establish resiliency within our, like here in Jacksonville? Wanda and I walked along the north bank of the St. Johns River, and I read an article that was published in Adapt that talked about how the St. Johns River has been dredged. I think it's down to 40 feet. You know, it was around 18, and the impact that's having on saltwater intrusion and the erosion of the banks, and also about, you know, the Outer Banks and the islands that are protecting our coast, and about how as the sea level rises, those are subsiding, and about how there are opportunities for Jacksonville to get funding in order to participate in trying to relieve some of that pressure. There are various Department of Defense funding programs for sustainability with cities. There are organizations like Pew that are leading opportunities in order to get funding to help stabilize the marshes. And all of that are opportunities for Jacksonville to participate. I met Ann Cagliese this morning. Excuse me for butchering your name. Believe me, I understand. Castello comes out, Castelliwa, Castellano, and everything. So forgive me for your. But she is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Jacksonville. Just got hired, and so those are the things that she is going to be working with. And I think all of us are going to want to support that effort in doing that. I've warbled long enough. I'm going to stop right now and open the floor for any questions anybody might have, and then we'll get on with the panel. Do I have any questions that I can answer individually? If you have any questions, please step up to the mic. Wanda, do you have a question? Yes, ma'am. Did everyone hear that? Questions about? I think that like many issues, and again, we have many critical issues that the support within the various administrations rise and fall. I think one of the things that have stayed consistent is because of what I talked about to begin with, is people in the government, in the military, and outside in various organizations recognize the challenges that we're facing with climate change. And so there is an underlying momentum to continue to move forward. And I see it in my own home state, which is a red state, but people are recognizing what climate change can portend, and that we have to have the resilience and sustainability to continue. So the momentum and I've been very close to climate security for the last 15 or so years, is upward. And I am personally encouraged by what I see wherever I visit, here in Jacksonville, with the initiatives that are going on here, in my home state, with initiatives going on in places like Nashville, out in the West Coast, in the heartland. So it's always a challenge, but the momentum continues to build. Please, another question. Yes, sir.
On or not. My question is really, what are current things the military are doing to address these issues that local governments could take advantage of, or what are some learning lessons that the military are implementing in the region that may be of benefit to local governments to help piggyback on some of these successes that you described?
One of the things, everybody hear that okay? One of the things that there are programs now where there is funding for communities because it is, we have military members, we have civilian supporters that are living off base. So it is imperative, for instance, those individuals are able to get on base to carry out their missions. So you're starting to see funding to support that, again, from the Department of Defense, shared fundings, and they some of those that are in here in the government may be able to talk more about that when they have the opportunity. Also, you're starting to see installations with a goal of going to net zero, of being able to produce the energy that they're consuming. There have been at least a couple of instances within the last couple of years that when there were issues, either natural or man-made, that brought the grid down, that those installations were able to provide support to the local community. So what we're seeing here is a greater relationship that's being built and funding shared between the military installations and the local community. The Department of Defense also is getting much closer to the Department of Energy in developing alternative ways of providing energy. So what we've seen in the past with a lot of the silos is gradually being broken down, and we're seeing a lot more work between organizations and agencies to share development funding and to share in the development of solutions to these problems. Thank you. Please, one more and then I'll quit. Yes, John.
General, you talked about, when you first started, talked about Africa, and I've operated on the Kenyan side and on the west side. And my question would be, you mentioned all those problems, if you will, of migrating people and weather and all that, but of course that eventually affects us in Florida. Do you have any thoughts about, we may do all that we want to do or can do over here, but what happens to the developing hurricanes and other things coming off the deserts and working their way this way?
Thank you, John. The XO was always after me about keeping my areas clean. So I thank you, John, for that question. One of the things that I talk about when it comes up about foreign areas and how we can impact that is I talk about chickens. Okay, why do I talk about chickens? One of the defaults we have that we've got to get away from is that every solution is a military solution, that we send in the Marines or we put the 82nd in or we send a carrier battle group. We need to be more forward-looking and proactive in dealing with that. And it can't be just the military doing that. It's got to be the full force of our nation, the economic involvement and diplomatic and so forth. In West Africa, one of the ways that they're dealing with the migration pressure and trying to counter forces that are working against stability is working in partnership with the American Soybean Association. The Soybean Association provides expertise and helps with the funding to bring soybeans into Ghana, for instance. And what that does is the expertise and the resources are used to build a poultry industry. And what does that mean? Well, when you build a poultry industry where none existed, where you give the opportunity for those individuals to have entrepreneurial projects, where you have the opportunity to create wealth in a public-private project, then you stimulate confidence in the government. You reduce the opportunity for instability, and you provide the capability for these people to have a better life. And that's what is required in order to reduce the pressure of migration. In terms of the other migration pressures, like the fishermen coming off of Lake Chad and herdsmen coming south, that requires additional help and development in order to provide another way for those individuals to develop economic well-being. So then that's the kind of projects that only, private industry and economic experts can do. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you now. I'm going to step aside, and I believe David's going to come back and introduce the other members of the panel.
Thanks, sir. All right, great opportunity now to link our broader national security concerns as Americans to one of the most important places in the United States for our military forces. Northeastern Florida is home to Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Naval Station Mayport, Marine Corps Support Facility Blunt Island, the Coast Guard Sector Headquarters, and Camp Landing, as well as hundreds of thousands of veterans. Northeast Florida depends on these bases remaining resilient, and the bases depend on Northeast Florida remaining resilient. Jacksonville has taken some excellent recent steps to increase its resiliency, and there is more on the horizon. Joining us for a panel discussion are two of the primary drivers behind resiliency in Jacksonville, Council members Randy Defour and Aaron Bowman. Thank you very much for joining us. First, Councilmember Aaron Bowman serves as the Senior Vice President of Business Development for the JAX USA Partnership, leading the business recruitment and expansion effort for Northeast Florida Regional Economic Development Team. As a member of the Jacksonville City Council, Aaron represents the 70,000 residents of District 3 and was council president during 2018 to 2019. Aaron served 28 years in the United States Navy following graduation from Annapolis and retired as a captain after serving as the commanding officer of Naval Station Mayport. He was a Navy fighter pilot, flying the FA-18 Hornet and the A-7 Corsair, was a DoD certified Level 3 program management professional. Aaron is married to his childhood sweetheart, Deborah, and they have a son, Blaze, who's a computer science engineer. Councilmember Bowman.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And General, thank you so much for coming down. And we still got to talk about Tennessee stories. That's where I grew up. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about my Navy and then in time on council, and I'll take it to a position and turn it over to Councilwoman Defour. It's always great to be with her. So obviously being a career Navy person, I've been on over a lot of land masses all through the waters, and I recognize how important trade is. Water plays in it, how important it plays into security. And if you think about our landlocked nations around the world, not very many of them can be places that you would call a successful place that you wanted to live in, and everything was going. So water has always been a part of my life. It's always been very important. And that was why it was such an honor to be picked to run Naval Station Mayport. So I was back in Mayport in 2007 to 2010. And I remember when I came around and had my initial tour, being a fighter pilot guy, I had not been stationed at Mayport before. So needed to learn about ships and helicopters, but was very interested about what were our facilities, what was our infrastructure. And I remember walking around and driving around, and of course we're surrounded on one side by the Atlantic Ocean and the other side by the St. Johns River. Got a little spit of land in between our basin and the St. John River. And I remember asking my public works department, okay, what are we doing about, water rise? What are we doing? I see that our dunes need replenishing. And the answer I got was, well, we're not really doing anything about it. And I can tell you at that time of life, in my life as a senior Navy captain, we really didn't talk about global warming. It was not something that was in our dialogue. And then an event happened that I think really changed at least the southeast United States on sea level rise, and that was Tropical Storm Faye in 2008. And that came in right as I was there. Of course, we got all the ships out of the basin that we could that were operational. I still had a cruiser inside the basin, one of our largest ships, and we tied that thing down like you wouldn't believe. And unfortunately, we had to go out there about every hour to readjust the lines, putting people in harm's way. But the people that had been at the naval station for about 30 years, controlling the ships in the basin, they said, you know what, we've never, ever seen water like that in this basin. And that was the turning event in my naval career and my time as a commanding officer at Mayport that I saw a change. And to your question, it was right in the middle of a administration, a Republican administration, and party didn't mean anything. We started down the road of looking at what we could do, what we needed to do, and where would we be in the future. So that was kind of my observation in the Navy after all these years of not paying attention to the water and seeing that dialogue change. And I think I saw that in 2008. So just a reminder why is what's so important for here. Some stats you may or may not know is we are the 12th largest city in the United States population-wise. We're the largest landmass city in continental United States. I think we got more coastline, river, and ocean base than any other city in the United States. And if you look at our properties that are along tributaries, waterways, ocean, and the level we're going now, in the next 30 years, we're going to have a lot of places that are going to either be underwater or when storms happen are going to have significant events. So it's very, very important. The general kind of mentioned also salinity. As you know, I don't know the actual numbers, but as you go closer downtown, I don't know what, we're 20 to 30 parts per thousand of salt water. And we've got data right now that shows the impact of what happens with a lot of rain, what happens with a little bit of rain, what happens with events. It impacts our vegetation, it impacts our aquatic life. So obviously very, very important. So now I'm going to transfer over into my 7 years of city council on what I've seen and what we're doing. And actually some pretty neat stuff that I think needs to come out and that you'll want to know. So not much. I came in 2015. The first event we had for me was Matthew. Matthew, I think, got our attention. What Matthew did, probably the most impact to me as a city council member, was just the amazing amount of trees that came down, power lines that came down, roofs that were ripped off. We hadn't had a major wind event like that in years. We did have some storm surge, but what got my attention on Matthew was really just the structural damage in the trees. And so we started looking at, okay, our emergency response, our reserve funds, what do we need to have? Not a whole lot of major changes. And then the next significant event that I think really got our attention, I think changed time like Faye did at the Navy base, was Irma in late summer 2017. The good news is Matthew had taken care of a lot of the trees. We still had a lot of tree damage with Irma. But the water surge, the storm surge, the downtown flooding, really, I think it certainly caught me off guard. We had to do rescues. We had long-term damage of floods, a lot of damage. And I think that was for the city, at least for me as a council member, the defining moment of, okay, now we got to start moving forward. So what did we do? In 2018, when I was president, the city council started a strategic plan. So for 50 years, we just had a new president come in every year and say, I want to focus on these things, and get about halfway through, then the next president would have new ideas. And I said, enough of this craziness. We developed a strategic plan. And we looked at kind of a contract between us and our residents on a 1, 3, and 5 year basis. And one of the items we did on that, and that was the fall of 2018, was, and I'm going to read it for you, is we address resiliency. And in quote, develop and fund a comprehensive resiliency strategy for natural disasters, economic disruptions, and environmental threat. And we recommended a chief resiliency officer. So that was in the fall of 2018. In the early part of 2019, we established the Adaptation Action Area Work Group. And that was significant. Brought in the Army Corps of Engineers, brought in the Navy, brought in a lot of expertise on that, and really sat down for that 5-6 month period of time and looked at what do we need to do about all these issues. And kind of the area there that we focused on was education, development of new regulations, interagency coordination, infrastructure, and economic and human resources. So it's a pretty big report. If you haven't read it, I recommend you do. Part of what came out of that was Ordinance 2019-331. And what that one did is it said, you know what, we got to look at future development. And so we made up specific soil requirements for fill, floodway setback requirements, and also finished floor elevations. Because what we didn't want people to do is build an area that we knew was going to be in trouble shortly. Also, the adaptation group also said we need a chief resiliency officer. So then in late 2019, when we did the strategic plan, also worked with the administration on something the city council had never done. And what is that? Yes, city council owns every dollar in this city, but we don't do the budget. So we get the budget and it's balanced, and we can approve or we can modify it. But historically, the budget comes through. Budget hearings are happening this week. We're almost finished with this next budget. Went to the administration. I said, you know what? We want to be on the front end of this budget. I've got this new thing called a strategic plan. I want to put in a funding request as part when you're building your next year's budget. So we did that in late 2019. And part of that budget request was establishing the chief resiliency officer position. And so that was, of course, the 2019 was for the 2020 budget. And you just heard that we have a chief resiliency officer. So that's kind of the progression of where we are. And where I'm going to turn it over to Councilwoman Defour after she gets her introduction is what did we set up a resiliency committee, and they met for many, many months. Kind of got a hiccup in there with COVID, but they've done a lot of great work, and she'll bring us up to the current date. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you. All right. Council member Randy Defour is Senior Vice President and National Agency Counsel for Fidelity National Financial, a Fortune 500 company. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of the South, Sewanee, and her JD from Cumberland School of Law. Randy served as commissioner of the Jacksonville Economic Development Commission from 2006 to 2012. She recently served as the chair of the Jacksonville International Airport Community Redevelopment Area. She served as a trustee on the boards of the Episcopal School of Jacksonville for 12 years and Riverside Presbyterian Day School for 8 years. She was appointed by Governor Scott to the District Board of Trustees for Florida State College at Jacksonville for 4 years, and she formerly served as chair. She also serves on the Women's Board of Wolfson Children's Hospital, the Cathedral Arts Project, and the Innocence Project of Florida. At the City Council, she is currently chair of the Value Adjustment Board and vice chair of the Rules Committee and the Parks and Quality Life Special Committee. She's a member of the Transportation, Energy, and Utilities Committee, the Northeast Florida Regional Council, the North Florida Transportation Planning Organization, the Jacksonville Housing and Community Development Commission, and the Opioid Epidemic, Vaping, and Mental Health Resources Special Committee. She previously served as the chair of the Resiliency Special Committee. Randy and her husband have 6 grown children and 2 grandchildren. Thank you, Councilmember Defour.
Thank you. Well, it's such an honor to be here with you this morning. I can't think of a person that has any more expertise on national security than a farmer, right, who understands environment, and a general. So thank you for being here. That's wonderful. If you had told me 2 years ago that I'd be sitting before you talking about resiliency, I would tell you need to go check your emotional health. Resiliency was never on the forefront of my experience. As a matter of fact, when I was running for office, if you talked about sea level rise, I remember distinctly saying, well, isn't the water getting high here? You couldn't really talk about it. It was you could talk about it in some groups, but you couldn't talk about it in all groups. And that certainly has changed as we sit here today, which is a good thing, right? First, I want to thank my colleague, Councilman Bowman, because he really has been instrumental in getting much of the work done before it ever became to the Resiliency Committee, as he has told you today. In fact, the Adaptation Action Area Workshop, we call it the AAA. It's just easier to call it AAA. The work they did was substantial, and we took that work when I was volunteered to be chair of the Resiliency Committee. We took that work and we started with that work, and it was pivotal. I mean, it was incredible the work they had done. We reviewed the work, we approved the work. So once I became chair of the Resiliency Committee, which was, I guess it was July of 2020, we broke the group down into 3 groups. We had 3 subcommittees. We had a subcommittee on infrastructure, a subcommittee on environment. That was one area that had not really been touched on before, and a subcommittee on community outreach. And we brought in people from the community. We had 60 plus people on that worked on the Resiliency Committee. Is anybody in the audience? I know Sean is. Anybody else? Was anybody else? Oh, here we. Oh, yes. Thank you. Of course. Was on that, what helped us with that. It was a huge outreach to the community. And from that, we got incredible. First of all, I was shocked about how much expertise we have here locally. This is significant. We had all these people come in, bring their personal expertise. And then we had, with the help of Sean and the Northeast Regional Council, we were able to bring in experts from across the country. And from that, 14-month process, we had a plan in place. It's like this thick. If you haven't read it, you really should. To come up with how do we address the issues going on in Jacksonville with our most vulnerable populations, with our most vulnerable locations. And it's absolutely, and the heat. One thing we talk about all the time is flooding, but we don't talk about the heat. So what are some of the things we can do to address those issues? It made us very focused on how do we build, right? And where do we build? Wetlands, for instance. They're important, and yet for years we have been building on wetlands. Yeah, it's important. How do we build a structure? Do we build it up as suggested? Yes, there are areas of our country today where 99% of their communities are built up. How do you build a roof? There are things that we brought in the insurance industry, and they talked about how do you build a roof? And if you just do simple taping on the roof, it can actually make a difference in a hurricane between a total loss of a house and no loss. There are things that we can do and do better. The chief resiliency officer was another area. Everybody wanted a chief resiliency officer. We even had it in the budget, but guess what? It hadn't even been codified. So we realized that we had to make a permanent position through the code for a chief resiliency officer, which we did. Now we have Ann, who's with us today. As a matter of fact, we're voting on her confirmation this evening. We look forward to that. So we have come a long way from the beginning of where Randy Defour, who was running for office, could only speak of the waters getting really high, to where we now, through Irma, realize the water is really high. So what did we learn from Irma? We learned that, number one, it's not just about the sea level rise, it's about the river. There were when I came on board, there had been really no, there had been nothing done about the river, studies. So we need to do more of that. What does it look like when we have a hurricane? How does that impact the river? How does that impact our neighborhoods? When Irma came through, there were hundreds of people that had to be rescued by boat. NAS is, including in my district, NAS is in my district. That's a problem. We lost the economy, I think the loss and damages due to Irma was in the $70 million, $80 million range. In fact, I don't think we actually know the total amount. We have not completely come back from Irma. You can see in areas in my district where there's still houses that are abandoned. So we have moved the needle, I think, a long way. A lot to do with my colleague here getting it started. We have a long way to go, but with our chief resiliency officer, I think, that can expand. What you're seeing in all governments is everyone gets siloed. So when you have a chief resiliency officer, she can come in, she can work through all the various departments and address those issues that we hadn't been able to address in the past. So I think we have a very bright future, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions at this point. If you've got one, please come up to the microphone.
How far out do we look? 25 years, 50 years, 100 years? And what is the impact on Jacksonville in the long term?
Okay. I believe some of the work that we have done has gone out pretty significantly far. I want to say 20 years. Does that sound about right to you?
I think about over 30, yeah.
Okay, 30. So we are looking futuristically. And that's a great question. I can promise you this, the work that was done by Councilman Bowman and the work that was done by the Resiliency Committee, people are tired of seeing those studies done and those reports done and put on a shelf, catching dust. With the new chief resiliency officer, that's not going to happen. Great question.
And if I can expand a little bit on that, I think where the difficult conversation is going to come is we've got to go backwards when we got to go forwards. The forwards is a lot easier than going the backwards. And what do I mean by that? Is that we know we can change where buildings are built. We know we can change how their elevation is. We know we can prevent building going on in low-lying areas. Those are the easy ones. The harder ones become, how do we take care of what we've already got? We can raise bulkheads, we can change water flow, we can do other hardening measures, but at some point in time that line stops. And think of the scenario. What keeps me up at night is, I've got somebody that lives on this side of the line, and we did everything, we're protected, but we had to cut it over here, and you're not. And those are going to be the difficult situations, and that's where I think it's going to be so key with our resiliency officer working with our public works and our planning and zoning and other folks on figuring out what do we need to do to go backwards to prevent or to lessen that Irma in the future. And those are going to be uncomfortable conversations. I guarantee you they are. And what is also going to be uncomfortable with that is money, because we can do anything with almost an unlimited budget, but we don't have an unlimited budget. And one thing I meant to mention when I was talking is, and I'm still going to take her up on it, but The Consul General of Netherlands is very key. I had a lot of discussion with them, and she's invited us over there, Randy. So we might have to take up on that. But if you think about a country that's been dealing with water forever, and they've done some amazing things, so they've offered to come in here. I think it's worth our time to not try to invent everything ourselves, but a lot of people are way ahead of us, and we need to borrow and steal from wherever we can.
Absolutely.
Just follow up a little bit on that too. You know, some of the things we found out it's counterintuitive, at least for me it was, in terms of how do we go forward. One thing is a natural shoreline actually is far better than a hardened shoreline. The data is undisputable. The other thing is, you had something else that I was going to hit on, but there's trees. You know, trees. Just think about it. A tree, the absorption by a tree is hundreds of gallons. You know, we can plant trees, and we're going to have to be thinking along those lines as we deal with it. Infill, how, you know, we've already done the developments, right? So we're going to have to think of how can we do water absorption in a natural way that can be beneficial, like parks. We can do this, but we're going to have to really be intentional and mindful of how we go forward. Thank you.
You know, a question came out about, you know, how we move forward on this. What I've just heard is the key element of how you move forward, and it's at the local level. It is really remarkable when you see members of the council, like the two to my left, that are becoming conversant with water, or with soil water absorption, and with how the saltwater incursion is happening. You know, these are the type of discussions and knowledge base that are built that will make a difference in the long run. So congratulations. Good to hear that.
Are you all able to give us a kind of an idea of what you think are going to be facing in the next 20 to 30 years? In the way of, can you give us some kind of idea of what you might be facing over the next 20 to 30 years? A lot of the IPCC report has forward looking. What do you all see when you look into the future?
I think if you look at the different studies, they have different levels of increase, and they think they're going to see between, 6 inches to 2 feet. I mean, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but we certainly are looking, and I'm sure our Chief of Resiliency Officer will look at the range to come up with how we should best go forward with a plan.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, there's some predictive maps of Duval County and on where water becomes an issue and how far out it becomes an issue. I think what I see from those maps, and I'm not an expert, is that for the next several years, we're going to be fine. It's going to be status quo. But if you project that out to 30 years, we're going to have places right now that are high and dry that won't be. I think what we're going to see, me looking in the future, the next 10, 15 years, is that storm events, weather events are going to be more significant to more people in this city. So that's what I see in the future, is that people that have had water events that came into their yard are going to see those water events come into their back of their house, and it's going to be probably more than we'd like to think. But I think that's going to be driven by big major weather events. But go out long term, I think it's going to change naturally, and weather events are going to be more severe.
You piqued my interest and you mentioned this Dutch council person, because that's where I'm from. And I am actually starting to write a book about water management, not only in Holland, but also in California. And so I'm really interested in how that goes. And I can give you some other ideas, probably from other writers in Holland that have been involved in this area of water management. Very interesting.
Thank you, sir. And actually, we had them scheduled to come up to Jacksonville when the Resiliency Committee first started, and then COVID hit, and she couldn't come up. But the offer is still there, and I think it's something we really need to do. And I think if she gets confirmed tonight, our new resiliency officer, I've already told her that she and I might have to take a trip to the Netherlands.
You should. Thank you.
I want in on that.
I see a lot of information coming out on relative changes coming to the FEMA flood insurance program and potential changes to that, and where costs will really be driven more down to personal decisions and you as the homeowner versus the federal government covering that. Do you believe that will help to drive some local decisions or decisions of individuals to move out of these vulnerable areas, or what is the net impact on that here in the region?
Yes, I think it will. When all of a sudden your flood insurance costs more than your mortgage payment, I think the market's going to start driving and dictating where homes are built. Now, I say that for those that can afford to live on the water. Now, there are areas, and we've had to buy areas back from the more vulnerable economic constituents who may be in rentals or leased areas that are maybe the landlords are not as caring as they should. And we have bought some of those properties back so that we can and relocated those individuals. But it's, as you know, we have a housing crisis right now. I mean, there's limited housing for affordable housing, so it's tough.
Quick question for you. Congratulations on all of your adaptation efforts. I think they are fantastic, and you certainly are ahead of a lot of other communities. I'm curious if there's any discussion for declarations about greenhouse gases, like the general had mentioned. They've gone net zero, or their goal is to be net zero. Is Jacksonville headed in that area and doing greenhouse gas inventories, or thinking about moving in the mitigation of exacerbating some of these issues?
I can tell you, for the Resiliency Committee, we had to limit the focus because it could have been so expansive. And so we really focused primarily on flooding, on water, and on heat. Those are the two areas that we focused on. I know the JEA is looking at that, and that's part of the Plant Vogel, why they've done the Plant Vogel. But that's all I have. Do you have anything on that?
I think that would be our biggest issues right now. There's a few things that have happened that are big time game changers. One, if you don't know it, Jacksonville is probably the leader on the eastern seaboard of liquid natural gas. And there's been a change in the shipping industry on where they can burn their diesel. So we actually have 4 ships in Jacksonville that operate fully on liquid natural gas. And you might have seen in the news the other day, we just issued permits, and I think that's about a $500 million complex to increase our production of natural gas in Jacksonville. The other thing is Jacksonville, the JEA, Councilwoman Defour mentioned it, is yes, we did do Vogel, but we also have one of the most aggressive plans in the United States, and it might be the highest municipal utility on solar panels. And so if you look at our solar plan for the next 20 years, it's pretty incredible on how much we're going to do in that area. So those would be the 2 that come to my mind.
I want to jump on that just a second and talk about how the rural areas are dealing with carbon or are getting set to do that. the largest carbon sink in the world is our agricultural lands. And what we are seeing develop now is the initial establishment of carbon markets for farmers to sequester carbon in soil. This is really exciting because it provides an opportunity for farmers to establish a more consistent, reliable revenue source. And it also provides the opportunity to address the gas or the greenhouse gas situation. The big impediment to it right now is being able to more accurately measure the amount of carbon that's being sequestered. And we're bringing in technologies such as hyperspectral sensors mounted on drones, sensors mounted on satellites, in order to develop the capability to rapidly and accurately measure the amount of carbon that's sequestered. So a lot of effort going on that now.
In your strategic plan, you talked about a lot about adaptation to higher water levels. What about adaptation to heat, and what's being done about that?
Thank you. That's a good question. Again, I'm a newbie to this, and I was shocked to find out what that meant, the heat, and it's significant with the cement. And we had people on the Resiliency Committee that had been born and raised in certain economically challenged areas that had an impact on their upbringing. And it was quite heart-wrenching to hear how that had impacted them. The answer to that is we got to be smarter about the products we use. We don't need to use cement everywhere, right? And we need to be using trees to, for shade. And there are a lot of trees that we use that are not known for shade. They may look pretty, a palm tree, but it doesn't provide shade. And so the city is changing the way they think. They are using, and primarily because our constituents out there, people like yourselves, have demanded that the trees provide shade. And so we have seen through their cheap tree mitigation program a switch from palm trees to shade trees.
Thank you. And so to specifically answer your question, no, we have not looked at that previously. Right. When you talk strategic plan. And certainly they looked at it. But the other thing about strategic plan is it's the plan's good for one day, and it gets looked at every year by ordinance. We have to review that every November. And so it's coming up right around the corner with a new council president. Last council president delayed it to way end. So it's time for an update. And I think it's time for us as council members, we all 19 of us get together and talk about what it is we need to do, where we need to focus, and we modify it based on conditions. So I'm not promising you that it will be on the strategic plan. I'm just saying to you that that is not a stagnant plan, and it gets modified every year.
Thank you all so much for coming, and Ms. Defour, yay, Swanee's right. I'm sorry to put a big, expensive, stinky question on the table, but I live a few 100 miles south here in the Indian River Lagoon, and we have the everywhere problem of rising water tables from more flooding, both from rain and sometimes rain and king tides. And so, especially in the fall when we get those big tides and it's wet, all the local fishing guides call it the flush. All the septic tanks drain out in the lagoon. And so I know you guys have a pretty significant wastewater infrastructure problem everywhere in Florida does. So my question is, and of course those things fuel harmful algal blooms that could prevent, people from being able to train at a base. You had a bad red tide up here, which never happens a few years back. My question is, where on the priority list is wastewater in the resilience priority list in terms of improvements and maintenance?
I think both of us can answer that. It's pretty high. And we've taken several actions over the last few years to get rid of drain fields and septic tanks. And we have several under the way right now. And we just put in $100 million, 2 months ago to add to that program. Depending on who you ask, it's in Jacksonville, it's a $3 to $4 billion program at least. And that doesn't count the properties that are way out in the middle of the countryside that you're never going to get to. But the ones that, what we've done as a city, working with the council, is identified the low-lying areas of the ones that are likely failing and leaching into our tributaries. And we're going in there and installing sewer and getting them hooked up. But it is not something you can do in a couple of years. This is a 20, 30-year program, I think. So turn it over to Councilwoman Defour.
Thank you. We are definitely focused on septic tanks. And as Councilman Bowman stated, it's a multi-billion-dollar issue. Each household, it costs around $50,000. So the thought is, well, maybe we should be thinking about doing it differently, right? I mean, so JEA is looking into that as we speak. Is there a different way that's not a septic tank to address this issue that won't cost $50,000 per household? The other thing I would share is that it's not just the failing septic tanks, but it's also the economically challenged areas that we're focused on. And because they can't afford it. I mean, they simply can't afford it. So we are looking to see how we can help them with their failing septic tanks. But we are definitely focused on it. I'll just say this too, if the Keys can do it, we can do it.
So I work for RS&H, which is an architecture and engineering firm here in town. And we've been working on a vulnerability assessment of the roads around Mayport Naval Station that's funded by the TPO, but obviously the Naval Station is a big stakeholder in that. And then we're also learning that, you know, there are a lot of other stakeholders. If you want to do any adaptation project to the roads, you know, FDOT's going to be involved and so forth. So what's the best way that the city can work with all those different stakeholders? And do you think we need a regional resiliency coalition such as they have in South Florida or Tampa?
It's a bunch of questions there, but you know, you mentioned the roads around Mayport. A1A is one that, yeah, that thing just needs to be raised up by about 4 feet. I can tell you, I think it was twice in my 3 years out at Mayport, I actually had to open the back gate and escort people back and forth to Mayport Village because the road was underwater. And I know that there has been some good work done on that, but there's more to come. I think to answer your question on getting regional involved, I mean, I was with the regional admiral a couple of weeks ago and we talked about resiliency. So we have certainly and it's always been there, a constant good partner with the Department of Defense. And we have a special office of the City of Jacksonville Veterans and Military Affairs, and they meet routinely, the mayor meets routinely with the base commanders as well. So that's there, the Coast Guard as well. To answer your question about do we need a regional group, that's where I'm going to say that's why we've got a resiliency officer is we're not the ones that are going to build this program. We're the ones that are going to facilitate it and get it started. But that's why we brought an expert in to tell us, here's what you need to do and how you need to do it. So I look forward to seeing where she goes with that. So, Councilwoman?
Yeah, I would just add that the Northeast Regional Florida, and that's really the role that they're playing. There's a Corps of Engineers doing a study right now on a regional level that looks at this very issue. And so we do have I feel like we do have a voice through that organization.
Projects that are either currently going on or future projects, is there something
In terms of resiliency? Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's in our capital improvement project list. You can see it through that process. And there are some that are being done by the TPO, and I actually sit on the TPO as well. They're doing some projects like it in Mayport.
Bill, the audio, oh, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Since we're bringing aboard our resiliency officer here today, you went out and looked for such a person. Can you give us some of the thoughts behind the mission statement? Maybe what did you expect this person?
I'll answer that. So first of all, the mayor hires, it's administration that hires this person. And we stole her away from New Orleans. I can't think of a better city that we could steal from than that one in terms of knowledge of water and what it can do to, the impacts of the water to a community. And I think they did a phenomenal job of hiring her. Her resume is outstanding. She worked for one of the administrations on a national level. I can't recall which, but they took all politics out and they went for the best person possible. And I'm very pleased to see who they chose.
Yeah, and I want to give credit to Councilwoman Defour too, because her group is the one that really kind of set up the job description and put the defining out there and made sure the budget was there to support it. But this was a national search. It was a throw the net out as far as we can, and it got significant interest. So I agree 100% with Councilwoman Defour is that it took a long time. It took a long time because we were very selective and it was very competitive, and we ended up in a very, very good spot.
What were some of the things that you're looking for? You were pretty broad in your response, but what do you expect? Sound bites, if you will, if you're in that job description.
Sure, policy-driven, and experience with drafting policies relates to a city, county. She has actually national experience as well. Because again, what a chief resiliency officer does that helps is that, you have in a governmental, in government, everything's in a silo, right? So Public Works knows their world, code enforcement knows their world, zoning knows their world. But there was nobody that knew resiliency world, or if they did, they knew a piece of it in each of those. So a chief resiliency officer had to come in and be able to work through different departments, bring people together, work together to come up with a common solution across all the barriers. And that's what she brings to the table, is that experience, having done it both at a national level as well as a city level, which is interesting when we talk about the military, because that's exactly what I heard you say, General, is that we're starting to see that now that with the Department of Defense working with the Department of Energy. So we're starting to see that now on a national level as well.
Yeah, and if I can expand a little bit on that, I mean, my conversation with her, I said, you've got pretty much a blank canvas right now. You weren't brought in for us to tell you what you're going to do. You were brought in for you to tell us what we need to do. So I think some areas that I think need focusing on, and I talked about a little bit, our planning department. Where do we rezonings? Where do we allow stuff to be built? Our permitting process. Should you be able to use that infill, or should you do a living shoreline? So I think connection all within the city. I mean, the good news and bad news is being a consolidated city is, we're an enormous city. That's also the bad news. We got 840 square miles here to worry about and one person. So I think the other thing that I'm looking for her to go is, all right, is this a one-person job? I think the answer is probably no, but who are those other people? So I think what I expect her to do is to build the position and build the department, and then also liaise. We got a whole bunch of other people that are stake owners that we haven't even talked about. St. John's River Management District being one of them. Department of Environmental Protection being another one. The Army Corps of Engineers, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard. So and of course, and I apologize to the Regional Council. They've done amazing work here, and they started it out. I don't know, it was about 6-7 years ago on talking about sea level rise. And so they're a huge partner, and they represent multiple Northeast Florida counties. So they'll be working together. But yeah, John, we didn't bring her in and say, here's what we want you to do. We brought her in and say, tell us what we need to do.
So this is not a question, but more of a comment. So really appreciate each of you being here today. It was a pleasure to partner with the American Security Project on this event, and the Northeast Florida Regional Council extends its appreciation to each of you for your dedicated local efforts that are inspiring broader efforts at the regional scale. And so in regard to your last comment that was just made, there are a few initiatives beyond the horizon that I really think will be of a lot of added value to the city of Jacksonville and to the region as a whole. And so the Northeast Florida Regional Council is in the process of formalizing a regional resilience collaborative, similar to other collaboratives across the state of Florida, like the South Florida Climate Compact. The East Central Florida Regional Planning Council has a collaborative as well in Tampa. So we're working towards those horizons, and we view the city and the new Chief Resiliency Officer as an extremely important partner on that initiative. And finally, I'd also like to mention we have Jim McCarthy and Rebecca Perry here from the North Florida Land Trust. And over the past several months, the North Florida Land Trust, in partnership with the Regional Council, submitted a pre-proposal to the Department of Defense for a Sentinel landscape designation. And so there's not many of these designations across the United States, but it creates a lot of federal funding opportunities. And the objective is to designate all of Northeast Florida as a federally recognized landscape where resiliency investments will be prioritized. And so we're working this week to finalize that full proposal. And by December, DOD might give a full announcement to see whether or not Northeast Florida is designated. But the nexus of that program to this event is that it's primarily focused on the connection of military installation resilience, environmental conservation, and agriculture. So this might be one of the most, big opportunities to bring military partners to the table, work with the land trust to conserve land, prevent encroachment, and continue these local efforts and scale best practices up to the regional and even statewide scale. So again, thank you to the American Security Project, and really appreciate everyone's participation in this event. And we were happy to host this in Jacksonville and highlight your perspectives. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Sean Lahav is the Resiliency Officer for the Northeastern Florida Regional Planning Council. He's been instrumental in putting this together. The connections that he has will be key moving forward. And really, I think that's the big thing to highlight, is that the connections are really the key to this whole problem. Without cooperation at the local and state and federal level, public-private partnerships, the cost of some of this will be excessive. And so, this is a community that bears a burden for the rest of the country and shouldn't have to shoulder that burden financially by themselves. See how much time we have here. Well, probably time for one more question, maybe. An audience member has one. I taught for a while. I'll just outlast you. Yeah, I can ask one then. So both the council members, you've worked very extensively with the business community here in Jacksonville. How does the business community view this problem in the future? Are they making adjustments? Are there things that we can expect to see in development in the area because of sea level rise and some of these issues?
I'll let Councilman Bowman answer that since he's the chamber guy.
Yeah, the good news is our region is growing very quickly and a target by many companies. And so we've never been more busy than we are right now on businesses looking at relocating or expanding. driven by many things, but I think COVID has been one that's kind of pushed it over the top. So, but with that said, we don't want to grow too fast and grow in front of our infrastructure. But what are some of the common things we're seeing right now? Seeing a lot of companies right now are saying they want renewable energy sources for especially if they're major energy users, and we've got a good partner in JEA that we work them with. But the other thing too is they also do very much want to know about what are our weather patterns and what are we doing as a city to address those. So it does come up because when you're talking about a company that's coming in and going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars on your area, they want to know what they're coming into, and so that is very much part of the discussion of what are we doing to make sure that we're looking in the future and not just in the past.
I'll just add, because I do work for a large company, and we look at business interruption. So what causes business interruption, and how do you address it? So we as a company have had to address that. But interestingly enough, COVID, right? It's a resiliency issue now. I mean, so we're all having to deal with what does it mean for your employees to work from home? What kind of setups do they need? If we build a office building, how much office building do we really need, right? And if you build the office building, which we see with the FIS, if you look at that structure right on Riverside Avenue, you can tell they took resiliency into play. I mean, it's built up, it's high, it's off the ground, their parking's underneath. I think we'll see a lot more of that where parking will from now on be underneath, and they're going to be building up anything close to the river.
Well, thank you very much. Unless we have any other questions, I'll go ahead and wrap up. All right. Well, it's been lovely having you here. Really appreciate the time that you've spent dedicating to this problem. Over the past few years, Jacksonville has a bright future ahead of it with Ann, if she gets confirmed, of course. And we'll look forward to doing more events like this. ASP will partner with other regional planning councils. We'll plan to go down to Orlando in a few months. We'll plan to go down to Miami. We'll plan to come back to Jacksonville because I think it's a really important issue that the country depends on places like this to make sure that they're prepared. Not only the base, but people in areas that may not be as affected as Jacksonville. And so we're glad to be able to bring attention to it. Thanks very much to WJCT and the ADAPT program, Northeast Florida Regional Planning Council. Thank you very much, General Castelaw and Council members Bowman and Defour. Thanks very much to our audience. Have a great morning. Enjoy it.